wanting my husband to get rid of his dog. It's been nearly 8 years since my husband brought Duke into our lives. At the time, I wasn't a dog person. I had always been more of a cat person, preferring the independence and low maintenance that cats bring, but I knew my husband had always wanted a dog. We had been married for a couple of years at the time, and though I was not excited about the idea, I agreed to let him bring a puppy into our home. I thought maybe I'd warm up to it over time, but looking back, I realize now that I was never fully comfortable with the decision. Despite my reservations, I accepted the dog as a part of my life because my husband was so happy. The first few months were a blur of feeding, walking, and cleaning up after the puppy. I tried to make it work, telling myself that I was doing this for my husband, that the joy Duke brought him would make the sacrifices worth it. From the beginning, though, it was clear that Duke was going to be more than just a pet. He was going to become a major part of our lives. Duke slept in our bed, which was something I wasn't initially comfortable with. I'm someone who needs their space at night to sleep, and sharing that space with a dog, especially one that could be a bit restless, wasn't easy. I didn't want to create tension over something that seemed like a minor issue at first, but it gradually started to wear on me. I found myself getting less and less sleep, and the dog's presence in the bed became a source of frustration. Still, I bit my tongue, hoping that with time, I would adjust, but I didn't. Instead, I began to feel more and more burdened by his presence in our home. My husband, on the other hand, was in love with Duke. He was the one who would lavish attention on him, often indulging him with treats and belly rubs, while I quietly grumbled about cleaning up after him, taking him on walks, and making sure his needs were met. Looking back, I see now that this dynamic was one of the many that slowly started to create a rift between us. As much as I wanted to respect my husband's love for his dog, I began to feel like I was being taken for granted. I ended up doing the lion's share of the work when it came to caring for Duke. I took him to the vet for checkups, cleaned up after him when he had accidents, and dealt with his shedding. I didn't mind doing things like feeding him, but it became overwhelming when I was also the one responsible for all the other aspects of his care. This continued for months, and when it was time for us to move into a new home, the situation didn't improve. If anything, it only got worse. It was around 4 years ago when I found out I was pregnant with our first child. I had hoped that the pregnancy would offer an opportunity to take a step back from Duke, but instead, it added a whole new layer of complexity to the situation. I had never been particularly fond of dogs, and now, with a baby on the way, I felt that Duke's presence in the house would be even more problematic. I asked my husband, time and time again, to consider finding a new home for Duke. I begged him, pleaded with him, told him that our new baby would be exposed to the same allergens that had been causing me so much frustration. My husband's response was always the same. He couldn't bear the thought of giving Duke up. He argued that the dog was family, that he had been with us for so long, and that it would be unfair to make such a drastic change. But I wasn't asking for anything drastic. I was asking for relief. I had hoped that by creating a new dog-free environment, we could reduce the number of triggers that were affecting my health and the health of our baby. Despite my growing anxiety about the situation, we moved forward with the pregnancy, and the house we bought was meant to be our fresh start. It had more space, a larger yard, and seemed like the perfect place to raise our family. But even though we had more room, nothing changed when it came to Duke. He continued to sleep in our bed, he continued to shed everywhere, and he continued to be a constant source of stress for me. We tried to compromise by creating a designated area for him in the living room, a small drop-down space where he could be confined without getting into everything. This, I thought, would help reduce his impact on the house, but it was never enough. I could still feel his presence everywhere. I tried not to let it bother me too much, but it became increasingly difficult. The shedding was a constant battle, and I found myself vacuuming and steam cleaning our carpets almost daily just to keep up. I took on all the responsibility for maintaining the house, yet it never felt clean enough. My husband, though he agreed to let Duke have his own space in the house, never really helped with the dog's care. When our daughter was born, my worst fears started to materialize. Shortly after her birth, we noticed that she developed eczema. It started as a small patch on her leg, but it quickly spread, becoming severe and painful. We took her to the doctor, who explained that her skin issues were likely due to a combination of allergies, including a reaction to pet dander. My heart sank when I heard this. I had suspected that Duke's presence in the house might be contributing to her condition, but to hear it from the doctor made it feel all the more real. I could already see how exhausted my husband was from the constant medical visits and treatments, but I couldn't help but feel like we were in this mess because we hadn't made the tough decision to let Duke go when we had the chance. At this point, I was beyond frustrated. Our daughter's flare-ups were getting worse, and I felt like I was fighting a losing battle. I begged my husband once again to consider finding Duke a new home, but he only grew defensive. He told me that I was being unreasonable, that we couldn't just get rid of Duke after all these years. He promised he would help more with the dog, but that help never really materialized. He never bathed Duke, never walked him, never really engaged with him the way I had hoped. I was left to care for both the dog and our baby, all while trying to manage the stress of our daughter's medical condition. I started to feel like I was stuck between between a rock and a hard place. If I pushed too hard for Duke to leave, it would drive a wedge further between my husband and me. But if I didn't, our daughter's health would continue to suffer. The emotional toll was immense, and I found myself crying more often than I'd like to admit. I didn't want to be the bad guy who was trying to force my husband to get rid of his beloved pet, but I also didn't want my daughter to have to endure constant flare-ups and discomfort. It felt like a no-win situation, and I didn't know how much longer I could handle it. Every day, I was cleaning up after the dog, vacuuming the floors, trying to keep the house as clean as possible, but it never seemed to be enough. Our daughter's eczema continued to worsen, and I was at my wit's end. The lack of support from my husband only made things more difficult. He would acknowledge that Duke was a source of stress for me, but he would never take any meaningful action to change the situation. I was doing everything I could to manage our home, our daughter's health, and the dog, but it felt like I was doing it all alone. The imbalance in our relationship was starting to weigh on me. I began to resent the dog, even though I knew it wasn't his fault. It wasn't Duke I was angry at. It was the circumstances that had put me in this position. Now, as I look back on everything, I wonder if I've been unreasonable. Am I wrong to want to remove Duke from our home to protect our daughter's health? Am I being selfish for wanting to have a clean and safe environment for my family? I don't want to hurt my husband, but I also can't ignore the toll this situation is taking on me. I'm emotionally drained, physically exhausted, and constantly on edge. I've tried to be patient, to be understanding of my husband's attachment to the dog, but it feels like I'm the only one who's willing to make sacrifices for the sake of our family's well-being. I don't know what the right answer is anymore. I just know that I can't keep going like this. I need help, and I need a solution that doesn't involve sacrificing my daughter's health. I don't want to be the bad guy, but I can't keep compromising my own well-being either. I wish my husband could see how hard this is for me, how much I've tried to make it work, but I don't know if he fully understands. I just want what's best for our family, and at this point, I'm not sure how to make that happen without losing something in the process. The emotional conflict I'm facing is overwhelming. I don't want to come across as someone who doesn't care about my husband's feelings or his love for his dog, but I also have to prioritize my daughter's health and our overall family well-being. It's a position I never thought I'd find myself in, and it's one that continues to leave me feeling uncertain, conflicted, and worn out.